listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach, and I specialize in helping people who are engaging in something they think counts as infidelity to deal with their feelings, clarify what they want, and make decisions about what they're going to do. No shame, no blame, and no judgments. If you would like my help working through your infidelity situation, you can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. I offer confidential, compassionate coaching via Zoom, which means we can work together no matter where you're located. All right, today we're going to talk about a particular kind of heartbreak or an experience that can be heartbreaking in unique ways. Sometimes we'll be in a relationship with someone we love very much, or at least like a whole lot. And the two of us will have a consistent, ongoing connection with regular communication and contact. And we may have a commitment to each other of some sort, or our patterns of engagement may be so well established that we come to depend on our relationship and value it tremendously, even if we don't have any explicit commitment to each other. And then the person we're in a relationship with just disappears. They stop calling or texting or whatever. They don't show up for plans we made with them, and they don't respond to our attempts to make contact with them. And if this happens to us, we may not know what on earth to think about it. Maybe we at first entertain the possibility that something major has happened to our person. Perhaps we imagine that they've been in a terrible accident and they literally cannot communicate with us. Maybe we consider the possibility that they've been sent on some sort of secret mission, and that all the while we've known them, they've been a secret agent of some sort or another. And if the person who has vanished on us is someone we've had a romantic connection with, who also happens to be in a committed relationship with someone else, we may imagine that their partner has found out about their relationship with us and that all hell has broken loose, right? And if this happens, we may at first wait patiently. We may trust that our person will resurface eventually. We may very much want them in our lives, and so we may hope that they'll be back and they'll have a perfectly reasonable explanation for their abrupt departure. But then time passes, and we start to wonder if our hope has been misplaced. We start to wonder if we will ever see or hear from our person again. We start to wonder how long we should wait. We may wonder how we will know if we have officially indeed been ghosted, or if there's some other explanation for our person's lack of contact with us. Now, this can happen within the context of any kind of relationship, of course. Ghosting or someone disappearing on you doesn't just happen within the context of affairs or secret romantic relationships. But while getting ghosted can be a painful experience under any circumstances, there may be particular challenges associated with being ghosted in the context of a secret relationship or a secret infidelity situation that are particularly excruciating, right? When someone you care about or are madly in love with disappears without warning or explanation, you've got multiple things to contend with at once. And some of this may be true of any ghosting experience, but not all of it. And we'll get to all of this in turn, of course. To begin with, there's the sudden absence of someone whose presence you may enjoy tremendously. The loss or apparent loss of someone you love and appreciate may be incredibly painful in and of itself. And on top of that, the uncertainty may be excruciating. You may be totally baffled by your person's actions, and you may be dying to know what the heck is going on. And all of that stuff is tough enough. But on top of that, if your relationship was a secret, you may not feel like your options for attempting to contact your person are all that great, right? You may feel like your options are quite limited, and you may not have ways to find out about the specifics of their well-being or whereabouts. So for instance, if you are married and your person was married, or both of you are married, and your relationship was a secret, even if you know where your person lives or you know where they work, you may be very reluctant to contact them directly or show up at their home or their work, even if you desperately want to know if they're okay and where they are and why they haven't been in contact with you. Right. If, you're in an affair type situation, you may believe that the costs of a surprise visit outweigh the benefits. And of course, it's also possible that a surprise visit is logistically out of the question. If you've been having a secret relationship with someone who lives halfway around the world, it might be pretty difficult for you to hop on a plane and show up at their office unannounced, even if you were theoretically willing to do so. And on top of all this, if your relationship with the person who ghosted you was a secret, you may not have anyone to talk to about your experience because nobody knows about the relationship and you may want to keep it that way. Oh, wait, there's actually more. You may also have to keep up appearances and hide your pain from those around you. For instance, if you're married and you've been ghosted by your affair partner, you may not want your spouse to notice that you're feeling completely devastated and ask you questions like, "What's wrong?" And that's a lot to deal with, right? Right. Here is a partial list of the intensely uncomfortable feelings that may come with an experience like what I'm describing: shock, sadness, extreme sadness, confusion, bewilderment, anger, humiliation, trauma, grief, alienation, loneliness, isolation, helplessness, and so on. This list is not meant to be exhaustive, but my point is you may be feeling some feelings that are pretty fucking painful if you've been ghosted. And so often, when we feel feelings that are excruciatingly painful, we try to lessen their intensity. And we may do this in any number of ways. We may distract ourselves by working or exercising or shopping. We may alter our mood with chemicals like alcohol or nicotine or heroin, right? There are all kinds of things we can do to try and create a buffer between ourselves and our emotions. Washing the dishes can be an amazingly effective distraction technique, I might add. But today I'm going to focus on two that are particularly pernicious but seem innocuous. One of those ways that we try and deal with painful emotions is by looking for answers or explanations of the experience we found painful. And the second I'm going to talk about is by trying to take action to quote unquote do something about the situation or experience we found painful. Let's talk about taking action first. Now, taking action is important at times in life, right? If we want to get anything done, we're going to have to take action for sure. Taking action or taking different kinds of actions than the actions we're currently taking is an important component of making change. But when we're hurting, so often we rush to take action in an effort to relieve ourselves of our pain. And that never works in the way we think it will. Being willing to feel our pain is what relieves us of our pain. And at a certain point, being willing to think differently about our experiences will help relieve us of our pain and enable us to make changes in our lives that may reduce our pain load going forward, right? But if something happens that we truly do not like, there isn't any action we can take that will fix our feelings as we are currently experiencing them. And this is true for a lot of reasons. We could discuss this on many different levels, but the point I want to make right now is that one of the reasons why this is true is that we may not be able to do anything about the facts of the situation that we don't like. If someone we love dies, for example, there may not be a damn thing we can do to change the fact of our death, at least as far as I know anyway, right? And if we love the person who died and we want them to be around us in physical form, why wouldn't we miss them and grieve their death? Would we really want to have any other response? I'm not saying there's only one acceptable response to death. Let me be absolutely clear about that. But I'm suggesting that if there's someone you love and you really want to be around them, with you in living form and they die and they're no longer living and they're no longer with you in their physical form, it might be completely legitimate and reasonable to be extremely sad, right? Even if we don't love the feeling of sadness, would you really prefer to feel any other way in this kind of a situation? Ask yourself that. You may not want to feel intense sadness forever, but sadness may be the best possible thing to feel for a while, right? And so we may do well to allow ourselves to feel it, even though it's uncomfortable, rather than trying to rid ourselves of the feeling. Similarly, if we love someone or like someone and enjoy engaging with someone and have come to cherish a particular form of engagement and connection with someone and hope to have ongoing engagement and connection with that someone, doesn't it kind of make sense to feel shocked and hurt if they disappear without warning or explanation? Put differently, if someone you care about ghosts you, doesn't it seem logical and legitimate that you might be upset? Again, I want to stress that I'm not prescribing a response to any course of events. I'm not saying you should feel shocked and hurt if someone ghosts you, but I am suggesting that you will do yourself a favor if you allow yourself to consider your response to the ghosting legitimate. We've got to be able to accept what we are currently feeling if we want to eventually change what we're feeling. And so often we don't want to do that. If our initial response to an event that we don't like feels too painful, we may really want to do something that will relieve us of at least some degree of our suffering. But in addition to that not helping as much as we think it will, we may quickly realize that there really, literally is not anything that we can do to change what's going on, right? If someone has cut off all contact with us and doesn't respond to our attempts to make contact with them, we may not be able to compel them to communicate with us or otherwise engineer communication with them. And even if we could, we may not be able to compel them to say the things that we want them to say or answer the questions that we think we need answers to. And if we know this, or if we begin to recognize this, we may turn to the other tactic I mentioned earlier, which is to try and search for answers or come up with an explanation as to why we got ghosted, or to get information about what happened that will make the experience make more sense to us. And although wanting answers or wanting an explanation or wanting information may seem totally reasonable, I want to suggest that wanting these things is not as helpful as we think it's going to be. If we've been ghosted, if someone has disappeared from our life without warning or explanation, it may be totally reasonable to wonder what on earth is going on. Okay. If we've been in the habit of talking to someone every day or every week, and they've tended to do the things they've said they were going to do up until all of a sudden they didn't, I think it's totally reasonable to be surprised and hurt by a departure from patterns we've gotten used to and have come to appreciate. And I also think it's totally reasonable to want to know what the hell is going on. Okay. I really want to emphasize that this is a legitimate desire. It's reasonable to want to know why our person has done whatever they've done. I think it can also be really helpful to explicitly and deliberately acknowledge the legitimacy of these desires to ourselves. However, we also have to be aware that we may not be able to get the information we desire, right? Both things can be true at once. Our desires may be legitimate, and we may never be able to fulfill them, right? It's possible that our person will reappear and provide us with an explanation of their behavior that makes total sense to us, and the events that we thought of as them ghosting us will start to seem like something else entirely. But it is also indeed possible that we will never hear from our person again and never talk to them again and never get any kind of explanation as to what happened or why they did what they did or anything. And it's also possible that even if we do have contact with them again and get some kind of an explanation from them about what happened, we will not find that information satisfying or sufficient, right? So here's what I want to offer you if you've been ghosted or you think you're being ghosted. It is completely reasonable to want information or answers or insights. And when we pin our emotional state on needing to know certain things or needing to understand certain things, we may be committing ourselves to feeling pretty awful and possibly for an indefinite amount of time. Because, not to beat a dead horse here, but because sometimes the information we desire is not available to us and does not ever become available to us, right? Moreover, no matter how much information you ever get or don't get, whether or not something makes sense is up to you. You are the only person who can determine whether you understand something or whether something, quote unquote, makes sense to you. We may think that things either objectively make sense or do not make sense, but that is not the way it works. What makes sense to us or does not make sense to us is determined by our way of thinking. And of course, our way of thinking is shaped by the time and place in which we live and the dominant thought patterns we're immersed in. And so everyone we know may agree that ghosting someone just doesn't make sense, quote unquote. But even if that were true in some objective way, which it is not, would it be helpful for you to continue to need your experience to make sense? Let me tell you what can happen when someone ghosts us and we believe we need to understand what happened in order to feel okay or feel better or heal or move on. We don't get any information about what happened or why our person disappeared from our lives. We may look for reasons why our person did what they did, and we may not be able to find any. If we search the past for clues, we may come up missing. And if this seems like a problem, we may decide that the only thing that could possibly make sense is that we are a terrible person. If we think that our person did a horrible thing to us by ghosting us, and we can't understand why they would have done something so awful, we may come to the conclusion that the fault must have been ours. We may decide that there must be something wrong with us because otherwise, how could this have happened? Here's a really bizarre and fucked up thing about our human minds. It may seem better, in a sense, to believe that there is something wrong with us, that we are a horrible person and worthy of behavior we consider hurtful and disrespectful and cruel, than to believe that sometimes humans do weird shit for reasons that might not have anything to do with us. Sometimes we want certainty so badly that we prefer to believe that there's something wrong with us than to believe that we don't always get to know why other people do what they do and believe that that might be okay. Put a little differently, when we believe that we need to have answers, we may arrive at so-called answers that don't actually do us too many favors. When we believe that we must have certainty, we may latch on to explanations that A, make us feel like shit, and B, aren't actually true or aren't the only possible truth or the most important truth about our situation. But when we believe things are real, when we decide things are true, they are real and true, and there are consequences for us. When we believe our stories about ourselves are true, they have an impact on the way we feel and the way we live our lives. And that stuff matters. And we have control over that stuff, even if we don't have control over everything that happens to us. Now, again, wanting answers or information or explanations seems so reasonable and so justifiable, right? And we can accept that those desires are legitimate without deciding that we're going to pin our emotional state of being onto having those desires fulfilled. We can recognize that we accept a situation when we decide to accept a situation, regardless of how much information or insight we have. We can decide to be okay with whatever information we have whenever we're ready to decide to be okay. It's not that there's an objective amount of information or insight or a particular set of answers that will necessarily ever satisfy us. And often, wanting more information doesn't do much more than drive us crazy. When we believe that we can't move on unless we have explanations or answers, then guess what happens? We don't move on. It's not that we're observing neutral reality when we say we can't move on unless we know something, right? We're telling ourselves the way it's going to be. We are creating our own reality when we tell ourselves we can't heal unless we have certain pieces of information. I'm going to say that again for emphasis. When we tell ourselves we can't move on unless we get answers or information, we don't move on. And on top of that, again, even if we get some information, we may never think it's enough. We can always move the goalpost if we don't understand that we are responsible for our own sense of satisfaction or peace, right? And I also want to ask you to ask yourself what it means exactly to quote unquote move on or heal or accept something. There aren't any objective definitions of any of those things. When we say that we want to accept something and move on, or when we say that we want to quote unquote heal, what we're often saying is that we want to feel better. And this is a completely legitimate desire. You may not be able to feel better as quickly as you might like, but you have every right to want to feel better. And it is totally possible to feel better. But in order to feel better about being ghosted or about any experience that you don't like and don't understand, I should say, you will have to change your thinking about what happens. You will have to be able to change your story of what the experience means for you. And this may start with giving up your belief that you need to know why your person did whatever they did or what their actions meant to them or about you for them. So how do you relieve yourself of wanting answers to these questions? How do you relieve yourself of wanting information? I can give you a few suggestions. You might decide that it's reasonable to believe that sometimes people do things that we will never completely understand. You might decide that it's okay to believe that we don't need to completely understand other people's actions all the time. You might choose to believe that we can tolerate ambiguity and mystery in life. You might choose to believe that sometimes you do things for reasons that you might not fully understand and that other people might not understand either. Or you might decide to believe that humans are interesting and strange creatures, and thus anything and everything they do is completely understandable. You might choose to believe that even though the things your person did confused you and hurt you, you don't have to let that confusion or hurt define you. You might choose to believe that even though the things your person did had everything to do with you, in the sense that you were the one who experienced them, they also have nothing to do with you, insofar as their actions are really all about them and are the product of their thoughts and feelings, right? You might choose to believe that even if you feel sad about the ghosting experience forever, you can bear that sadness without being defined by it or derailed by it. Now, those are just a handful of suggestions of ways you might choose to frame your thinking. Notice here that I'm not suggesting that you need to make cookies out of shit or cookies out of ingredients that you consider shit-like in quality. I am not an advocate of the Pollyanna approach to life or trying to make everything great that we don't like in life. It's okay to not like experiences we've had. It's okay to have strong feelings about experiences that we've had and disliked. I am not suggesting that you need to be fine with the experience of being ghosted, although of course you could get to the point of being truly fine with it. And if you want to, you absolutely can. But sometimes the point of renegotiating our relationship to painful experiences is not to get rid of all the pain or let go of all the pain or move beyond all of the pain, but to learn how to be with it in a way that works for us. Pain doesn't have to be a problem after all. There's a cute picture I have that I'm sure I found on Facebook at some point or another that's called Growing Around Our Grief. And it shows an image of a rock or a marble in a series of jars. And the caption says, people tend to think that grief shrinks over time. What really happens is we grow around our grief. And the image shows this rock or marble that stays the same size in a series of jars that get bigger and bigger. The marble doesn't shrink, but the jar expands. And so too can we grow around our grief without having to dismiss it or get rid of it. And I'll share this image on my Instagram and Facebook the week this podcast episode comes out. So if you want to see this picture in either of those places, you can look for me and it under the handle at Marie Murphy, PhD. But let me be quick to point out that although I think this picture is cute and is sometimes the way our relationship to painful events works, it doesn't have to be the only way it works. Sometimes we grow around our grief, but sometimes our grief or confusion or hurt or shock really does dissipate, sometimes even completely. Sometimes we can completely and totally alchemize our lead into gold. My point here is not that there is any one right way of dealing with painful experiences. The point for now that I'm trying to make is that if we want to change the impact the experience of getting ghosted has on us, we have to be willing to change our story about what the events meant and mean for us. She laughs. On that note, I'm about to tell you that I have had a few experiences of being ghosted. And I used to consider those experiences to be major dramatic events in my life and not in a good way. On a recent episode of this podcast, and actually, I think it was last week's episode, I talk about story fondling, or the practice of treating stories of things that happened to us in the past like precious pets, and how I used to engage in that practice quite a bit myself. And I will tell you that I definitely fondled my stories of having been ghosted. So much so that I put quite a lot of time and energy into writing a story about my experiences of being ghosted, which is still available for you to read on medium.com. You can go and find it if you like. My handle on Medium is also at Marie Murphy, PhD. And the story I'm talking about is called The Unique Heartbreak That Comes from the Loss of Close Friendships, or at least it's something pretty close to that. Now, I'm not going to recount all of those stories for you here for very specific reasons. And if you do go and read the story, here are a few things I want you to know. The act of writing that piece was most definitely an act of story fondling, but I didn't recognize that at the time. And that's okay, right? I did recognize it, however, as soon as I published the story. I was like, wait a minute. I just put all of this time and energy and effort into reinforcing a very particular narrative of events in my life that is basically a reinforcement of a woe is me tale. It's not totally a woe is me tale, but it's a woe is me tale, right? And so there's no way that I could recommend that anyone read that piece now without acknowledging that feeling sorry for myself was part of the motivation for me writing the piece. And that's totally cool. There was, that's just where I was at the time. And there's nothing wrong with that. Whenever too many evers, whenever we write anything about ourselves, it's always a reflection of where we are at that point in time. And how could it be any other way? But the point now is that I'm not in the woe is me state anymore, which is great. But perhaps even more interesting than that is that after I finished writing that piece, I realized that there have been times in my life when I have ghosted people myself. There have been times in my life when I vanished from people's lives without saying goodbye and without leaving them any way to get in touch with me. And get this, that recognition actually took me by surprise. I had been so focused on my poor me stories of having been ghosted by people I loved so much and how terrible that was for me that I lost sight of the fact that I have done some pretty similar things myself. Whoopsie, on so many different levels. Now, I mentioned this to underscore the point that although we may desperately want other people's actions to make sense to us, There are plenty of times in life when we aren't really aware of what we ourselves are doing. There may be times in our lives when our own actions don't make sense to us in the present or in retrospect. There may be times in life when all we can do is think about our own immediate needs. There may be times in life when we simply may not have the capacity to think about how our actions might be received by others, even if those others are people we care deeply about. We're only as conscious as we can be from one moment to the next. I can honestly say that when I look back on my own actions and I realize, oh, yeah, I kind of ghosted that person. At the time, I didn't think that's what I was doing. I was all wrapped up in whatever the hell I was all wrapped up in. And I can recognize my own lack of awareness in retrospect without chastising myself for being an awful person. Rather, I can look back on my past actions and go, wow, yeah, humans, myself included, are just doing the best we can. And it may also be true that the people I effectively ghosted might have thought that I was pretty awful or that my actions were tremendously hurtful. And who knows, right? Maybe they still do. Who knows? And I can hold all of that without making it into a problem. I can hold space for all of that with the utmost regard for my humanity and for theirs. Now, I want to suggest that although you have every right to dislike other people's behavior, it may not help you to believe that their actions are indications that there is anything fundamentally wrong with them or with you or with the world or with the universe. To take a couple of lines from the song Nobody's Side in the 80s musical called Chess, everybody's playing the game, but nobody's rules are the same. It's a great song. You should totally look it up. Nobody's Side from the musical Chess. And I think it's really important to remember that. We're all playing the game here, but we're all kind of running on our own program. So even though when someone does something that you don't like, it is in a sense all about you because you are experiencing it, you have to remember that it is your thoughts that create your emotions, not the other person's actions in and of themselves. And what that means is that if you've been ghosted, once the dust settles and the intensity of your emotions starts to dissipate, you have the opportunity to decide intentionally what you want to make the experience mean for you. It's okay to feel terrible about the experience, but if you don't want to feel terrible forever, you don't have to, but you have to be willing to change your story about what happened. And I can help you do all that. I can help you deal with feeling terrible if you've been ghosted. And then I can help you start to feel unterrible, right? So if you've been ghosted by your affair partner and you want some help making sense of the situation, let's work together. And of course, I can help you with any other aspect of your infidelity situation as well. To schedule an introductory coaching session with me, go to my website, mariemurphyphd.com. I can't wait to meet you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Have an amazing week. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.